welcome to a members only video. So today's topic is going to be very briefly about how you can read the sign of Aquarius in the Navamsha chart or the D9 divisional chart. I have briefly touched upon this topic in another video, but I don't remember which one. I think it was the one where I talked about celibacy and whether people are better off being alone, or signifiers in the horoscope that show delay in marriage and stuff like that. But I only just skimmed the surface of this topic, so I want to get a little bit more in depth now. There are two secrets actually mainly connected to how to read Aquarius. But the main one and the most important one that I want to share is about the Navamsha. So Aquarius is actually connected to loss, a feeling of loss, and the experience of loss. This is why Aquarius is also a signifier of detachment, emotional detachment. This is why there is a war on emotions in general now that we are living in the age of Aquarius as well. But I won't get into that right now. But what I wanted to say is that if you look at the Navamsha, whether it's the Ascendant or any of the planets in the Navamsha that are sitting in Aquarius, you can see some theme of loss connected to that area of life. When the Ascendant of the Navamsha is in Aquarius, and this is the part that I mentioned in another video, I'm pretty sure it was the one on celibacy. I mentioned this, that generally with Aquarius rising in the Navamsha, you don't see a lot of interest in marriage. Either you don't see a lot of interest, or somehow there might be delays and frustrations connected to finding the right partner for a marriage. So it's like one way or another, there could be some kind of a feeling of loss connected to marriage. Because Aquarius is also very emotionally detached and very focused on freedom, independence, it's a sign that doesn't care so much about partnership or emotional connections or any of those things. And since the Navamsha is pretty much the chart of the marriage, having the Ascendant of the Navamsha in Aquarius shows that this person is not very focused on marriage, and they might be happy, let's say, being in a long-term relationship without actually making it official, or sometimes, like I said, they just don't really care about marriage or relationships at all, in which case they could be happy spending long periods of time on their own. But you can apply this, like I said, to all the other planets in the Navamsha. So if, for instance, you have the sun in the sign of Aquarius, there could be some kind of a loss connected to the father figure. There could also be some kind of a loss connected to everything that the sun represents, unfortunately. So maybe vitality, status, recognition. Now, it doesn't have to be negative, because I know it sounds maybe a little bit negative. Obviously, this is just one configuration. So as usual, you have to look at the full picture. You have to see what else is going on, not just in the Navamsha, but the D1 chart and the D10, especially when it comes to recognition, because these are topics that have to do with career, right? So you want to check the D10 or the Dasamsha chart for that as well. But yes, you could see some kind of a loss connected to the sun-dominated themes in a life. And this could be internally felt from a young age. I know some people refer to the Navamsha, and I myself have said this in some videos, that it especially shows in a person's horoscope after the age of 35 or after middle age, whatever you consider that to be. But actually, the Navamsha shows the inner landscape of a person. So it's more like what they are like on the inside. So, in my opinion, actually, and I wanted to mention this, I don't know if I did in a video, that my opinion is once people get older, they sort of become themselves, you know what I mean? So, it could be an explanation why the Navamsha placements seem to become more prevalent, more prominent after the age of 35. And I'm talking about the aspects that pertain to a person's personality or careers or interests and stuff like that. So I'm not talking about strictly the marriage related aspects that the Navamsha also can shed light on. things like relationship to in-laws and children and all that. Yeah, you can also see all of those things. But when it comes to things like, for instance, why do people change career paths past the age of 35, or why do they suddenly take up new interests, right? That oftentimes are explained actually by the Navamsha placements. I think that's more because their inner nature has been suppressed up until that point, because early on in life, you're more subjected to the pressures of society and your family and all that. So as you get older, you become more and more, you grow into yourself, you grow into your own, and you learn who you are. And generally by middle age, people become more uncompromising about who they really are, because they're also faced with, the reality of their own mortality. So they get to that point where they're like, you know what, why should I sacrifice who I am and what my interests are for the sake of others? But let me not digress too much. I just wanted to explain that. So if you have Sun in Aquarius, that's how it could play out. For instance, with Sun in Aquarius in the Navamsha, irrespective of the sign that it's in the D1 chart, you could have a feeling of not having a father figure. For instance, maybe you had a father figure who was emotionally detached, or maybe even physically absent, and maybe it's not even that particularly emphasized in the D1 chart, but if you have it in the D9 chart, these are especially relevant in those situations where the child actually had a father figure that was physically there, but the child didn't feel any kind of emotional closeness, right, to the father figure. Like there wasn't any real support system or any building of confidence. So in other words, the father figure was somehow absent, not interested in the child, that kind of thing, maybe not supportive. Another thing is, again, if Moon is in Aquarius in the Navamsha, it could be the same thing for the mother figure, right? The mother figure can be experienced as someone who is a detached, aloof, also very intelligent, right? So it's not all doom and gloom. With Aquarius, this is the sign of the mad scientist. So you could have, like, if you have Sun or Moon in Aquarius in the D9, it could be that you perceive the father figure or the mother figure to be very intelligent. They could have really encouraged you to develop intellectually, but then again, there was that aspect of lack of emotional closeness, aloofness, coldness. Because Aquarius is also co-ruled by Saturn. It's co-ruled by Saturn and Rahu. So, because of the Saturn influence, there's that element of strictness, of coldness, practicality. So you could have, let's say if you have Moon in Aquarius and the D9, you could have perceived your mother figure to be emotionally detached, not very interested in you. Maybe it didn't really have time to spend with you. There could be, some buildup of resentment there, depending on the situation. Again, a lot depends on what else is going on. So if you have, let's say, malefics aspecting this Moon, it's more likely that the child, the native in question that has this placement, perceive the mother figure in a negative light, So if you have, let's say, Moon in Aquarius conjunct Rahu, you could have had a mother figure who seemed very materialistic. Maybe she was very ambitious and driven to gain social status, money, and all that, and didn't really care about building a connection with you, the child. If on the other hand, let's say you have Moon aspected by Jupiter in Aquarius, you could have perceived your mother to be, okay, maybe she wasn't the warmest, but you still appreciate the fact that she taught you things and was wise and, encouraged you to develop intellectually, for instance, maybe encouraged you to pursue an education. So again, I'm just giving you some examples because everything depends on individual circumstances to some extent. So I'm just giving you some general characteristics here. Let's say if you have Mercury in Aquarius, this could be about siblings, right? So you could have had siblings that, again, maybe the relationship with the siblings was not particularly affectionate, maybe detached, maybe the sibling was absent for long periods of time of your upbringing, or you just had a very cold, maybe friendly relationship, but again, not a lot of emotional closeness there and comfort. You could have had, also with Mercury, it could be neighbors as well, or just younger people in general. So actually, let me expand on that. We're dealing with archetypes here. So Mercury technically could show the way that you related to siblings, but later on in life, it could reflect on the way that you relate to young people in general. So that's what Mercury can tend to show. And it also can affect the way that you think, and your siblings could have affected the way you think as well. Let's say if you have Venus in Aquarius, there could be, now this is particularly painful, especially if you have, let's say, Venus in Satabhishak Nakshatra or Purva Bhadrapada. Maybe in Dhanishta, not so much, depends. But in Satabhishak Nakshatra, there's an element of suffering there. In Purva Bhadrapada, again, there's an element of suffering. Venus does not do well in Purva Bhadrapada because it's a very harsh environment, very, think of it as the fires of Mordor from Lord of the Rings. And Venus is kind of like a ballerina. So if you put Venus in Purva Bhadrapada, it's kind of like throwing a ballerina into Mordor. It's like not a good environment, in the sense that it's a very harsh environment, and Venus is a very soft, benefic planet. And what this translates into is there could be, in this situation, maybe there could be heartbreaks with female figures early on in life. So again, this could be like a sister, or it could be like any other female peer, let's say, when you were growing up, or it could be unmarried women in your family when you were growing up that you had maybe bad relations to. And this could somehow impact the way that you relate to women. And this might be especially influential in a negative sense if you are a man, if you are a straight man especially. But irrespective, actually, when Venus is in Aquarius, it's not great because Venus is the Karaka, which is the main signifier of the Navamsha, of the marriage chart. So a challenged Venus will tend to show, again, some significant heartache, connected to the topic of marriage, right? So it could be like you get a spouse that is aloof. You yourself could just be very detached. But usually I tend to think of astrology as cause and effect, So it's like, even though you, let's say you look at Venus in Aquarius, for instance, and you might think, oh, this person is just naturally detached. Oftentimes that's not the case. What you actually see more often than not is that the person was severely maybe traumatized at some point in their lives. Maybe they had a very bad relationship, either one that turned out to be abusive or just one where they were severely disappointed. Maybe they had their hearts thoroughly broken at some point, and this has rendered them, unable to connect anymore, right? It's like they get to a point where they have massive trust issues or abandonment issues or something, to the point where they find it very difficult to connect emotionally to someone else. So that's how I look at it. I don't just look at it from a very fatalistic point of view, like, oh, this person has Venus in Aquarius, therefore they may not be interested in relationships or they won't get married. It's more like their psychology is making them, take these actions, like not investing in relationships or not getting married or stuff like that. You have to look at the full picture again. So, and it's not always like going to be exactly the same experience that gives the same result. Meaning the result in this case can be emotional detachment of the native, especially when it comes to long-term committed relationships, especially marriage. But the cause could be different things. For some people, it could be like maybe they had an abusive aunt when they were growing up, or for another person, it could be they had a really bad first romantic relationship, right? And that has led to trust issues. Just to kind of explain how I see things anyway. I'm not sure if this is how all astrologers see it. Some people, from what I've noticed, like some astrologers, especially the Indian astrologers, I have to admit, seem quite fatalistic with these interpretations. Like they will just see, you have this placement, like let's say Venus in Aquarius or the Lord of the third house in I don't know what house, and they always see it as it's going to give this result. But they don't really try to understand the psychology behind it. I'm not meaning this as a critique, just something that I noticed, and I'm sure that it's not true for all of them. Anyway, I digress. So if you have, let's say, Mars in Aquarius, see, and also each of these planets, each of these archetypes can show several things. So, for instance, with Venus, you could have a detachment not just towards romance, but everything Venus related. So it could be a lack of interest or a feeling of loss connected to pleasure in general. Like you could become someone who just maybe, let's say, in the first half of your life, you were very hedonistic, very focused on material pleasures, and now all of a sudden you become more spiritually inclined, or you're more focused on healing, especially if you have Venus in Satabhishek Nakshatra, for instance. You could take interest in healing professions all of a sudden because Venus is the healer. With Purva Bhadrapada, maybe you just become more spiritual, right? That's the spiritual side of Purva Bhadrapada. Usually, once they have gone through that pursuit of hedonism and materialism, they reach that point where they want to shut down from the rest of the world and just want to understand the patterns of the universe and the thoughts of God and all that. So by translation, let me put it like that, and not by translation, how should I put it? By comparison, similarly, in a similar fashion, if you look at Mars in Aquarius, for instance, could show, again, for a woman or for a gay man, for instance, could be a relationship to a younger man that somehow traumatized them or somehow affected them negatively. Either it could be, again, a younger male when they were growing up, like a brother figure, a cousin, a peer, or it could actually be like a romantic partner that somehow maybe has traumatized them in some sense, and now it has led them to maybe disown their own masculinity. That's another way to look at it. So a feeling of loss when it comes to being able to relate to men or male figures in general. Another way to look at it is everything that Mars stands for is, courage, vitality, being a go-getter, all of those things, pushing yourself forward, going after what you want. So there could be like a feeling of detachment or of loss connected to your drive in general, Again, a lot of this also depends on what other planets are aspecting it, what nakshatras all of these planets are sitting in, including the Mars, right, etc., etc. So I always mention you have to look at the full picture. I'm giving very general potential outcomes here. And with Mars in Aquarius, again, you could have lack of ambition, a lack of drive. So worst case scenario, this could even give depressive tendencies. And you actually can see this even in the D1 chart. And I should have mentioned this, and I will mention it also, and maybe in the description. You can apply these also to the D1, but they become, I would say, especially important and impactful when you see them in the D9, because again, the D9 is your inner landscape. So it's how you feel deep inside when you are alone with yourself, and it's the side of you that basically others don't easily see. So yeah, Mars in Aquarius, again, can show, like I said, so depressive tendencies, worst case. So you might struggle to find motivation in life. That's basically what it is. And like I say, it set a kind of detachment from your own masculine side, because everyone has a masculine side. So again, most likely because of a bad relationship to a male figure, you could have this feeling of, I don't want to have anything to do with masculinity, for instance. So even if you have sides within yourself that could be labeled as traditionally masculine, like being a go-getter, being angry about things, having a fighting spirit, you might disown these parts of yourself. You might project them onto others. And again, especially if you're a woman, you might have a tendency to project them onto romantic partners and maybe feel subconsciously drawn to men who are aggressive because you have disowned these parts of yourself and you can't really stand to look at them. So you will tend to manifest them on the outside. That's usually what happens with psychological projection. If you have Jupiter in Aquarius, this is one that I've actually heard some pretty negative things about. And Jupiter actually stands for children. So it stands for multiple things again. But one thing that it stands for is children. So when you have Jupiter in Aquarius, I've actually heard this from several astrologers, that it tends to show lack of children. And from what I have noticed, see, again, as usual, this is not 100% true. It does depend a lot on what else is going on there. But what I have seen, actually, I have seen this indeed in the horoscopes of people who didn't have kids. Some of them have actually not been able to have kids, or their partners were not able to have kids, so they decided to, stay with their partners and just not have kids. I've also seen this in the horoscopes of people who just were absolutely determined not to have kids. So again, it depends on the horoscope. So I'm not trying to say that if you have Jupiter in Aquarius, that in the Navamsha, that you're going to be denied children or anything like that. Again, when it comes to fertility and kids and all that, you also have to look at a lot of other placements in the horoscope and in multiple divisional charts, not just this one aspect. However, as usual, because Aquarius shows detachment, you actually see this a lot where people with this placement, even the ones who do end up having kids, they're probably not the craziest about parenthood. So there's this feeling of detachment towards Jupiterian aspects, right? So one of the aspects is having children, having a legacy, right? So you may not care that much about having kids, taking care of kids, and all that. Another thing that Jupiter represents is knowledge, spiritual knowledge, religion, faith, travel, expansion of the mind as well. So you could have a detachment towards all of these aspects. So maybe you're not interested in traveling as much. Maybe you're not interested in studying. You could have these cases where people, let's say, will start a university, but they will never finish or something, or they let it drag on over years. That could be maybe because they have an afflicted Jupiter in the Navamsha, right? So if it drags on past the age of a 30-something, 35 or so, they might reach a point where they're just, I'm done. I'm not interested. I don't feel motivated to continue my studies right now. So it could be like that. You might just lose interest towards studying. And of course, as usual, and I should have mentioned this, but I kind of assumed that it's sort of understood, you definitely have to look at conjunctions to these planets as well, especially conjunctions, aspects of any kind, but conjunctions especially, because if there is a planet conjunct, let's say Jupiter in Aquarius, first of all, in Vedic astrology, they can only be conjunct if both of them are in Aquarius, right? But what I'm trying to say is, of course, you could have different interpretations here, right? So there could be multiple areas of your life that are connected to one another and afflicted, let's say afflicted, if I can say that. It's not really an affliction, maybe a minor affliction, but if they're both sitting in Aquarius, there will be a detachment towards both of those areas of your life. That's what I wanted to say. So let's say if you have Mercury and Jupiter conjunct in Aquarius, it could be like you become more spiritual when it comes to the topic of business and studying and education. But conversely, you might lose interest in worldly things when it comes to these aspects of your life. So if you have a business, for instance, you will be less and less interested in diversifying and multiplying your profit, which is Mercury energy. You might be also less interested in, let's say, using your hands or activities that involve using your hands a lot. Like, let's say you were interested in ping pong before, but now you're no longer interested in it. Just to give you an example. Communication, maybe you will lose interest in that. Now, I'm not trying to say that when I say lose interest, it's not going to be like 100%. Again, Mercury can also be siblings, so relationship with siblings could get colder after the age of 35. So it's not going to be like 100%, but there could be some aspects of it where there's detachment, lack of interest. And, or it's like Aquarius, is the most spiritual sign of the zodiac. I should have started by saying that. So when you have placements in Aquarius, the interest will have a spiritual motivation almost always, right? So if you can find a spiritual motivation for doing something connected to that area of your life, then you will keep your motivation, you will keep your interest, and you will flourish in that area of life. So for instance, again, if you have Jupiter in Aquarius, it could be that you're just not interested in having kids for the sake of having kids. You're only going to have them if you can be sure that the kids are going to be raised in accordance to your belief system, to your religion, whatever your belief system is, right? Not everyone is religious. One famous example, actually, of someone who has, if I remember correctly, Jupiter in Aquarius in the Navamsha is Angelina Jolie. And I remember seeing an interview with her ages ago where she said she never really had interest in having her own kids. She always, well, I don't know about always, but she became interested in adopting, and she adopted a child basically when she was single, so she raised the child on her own until she met, Brad Pitt, and then decided to get married and have her own biological kids. And according to, what she said, it was always in her mentality that she wanted to raise her kids in a very specific way, so maybe it wasn't until she met the right partner that she was able to envision raising kids the way that she really wanted to, as in teaching them about multiculturalism and being open-minded and all those things that she believes in. Just to give you an example, if you have Saturn in Aquarius, see, Saturn is pretty strong in Aquarius, so you don't have to worry about it. So Saturn is actually going to be naturally pretty motivated in Aquarius. So there will still be maybe some detachment again when it comes to the topic of social hierarchies, climbing the social ladder, maybe relationship to government agencies, to the state, to, Saturn rules things like the justice system and all these things. So maybe there could be a little bit of a rule breaker energy here. But again, since Saturn is strong here, there will be motivation. It will just be from their own belief system and their own values. Yeah, pretty much. So most likely there will also be some kind of a spiritual or maybe technical motivation here. So it's not going to be as apathetic. Saturn in Aquarius is not going to be as apathetic as Mars in Aquarius, for instance, which is really not happy. Mars in Aquarius is one of the most unhappy positions because it's Aquarius is very spiritual, the most spiritual side, and the reason it's called the most spiritual sign is because it's the 12th from the 12th. So Aquarius is 12 placements from Pisces. Some people, especially in tropical astrology, you see this all the time. They always call Pisces the most spiritual sign, but that's not correct. Pisces is about faith, and might even be drawn to religion, organized religion, but Aquarius takes it a step further, and it's about having this very all-encompassing humanitarian approach, of being able to relate to anyone from any background. This is also why Aquarius is co-ruled by Rahu, which is the planet of multiculturalism or foreign cultures. And basically, a person who's spiritual is going to be able to have empathy towards anyone, irrespective of their background, irrespective of whether they are from a similar belief system or not, which is not true for someone who comes from, let's say, an organized religion to a large extent. So, just wanted to give this as an example. If you have Rahu Ketu, I wouldn't see this as particularly impactful, to be honest. Rahu, again, in Aquarius is pretty strong. So, if anything, Rahu in Aquarius in the D9 might be the most materialistic planet to be in Aquarius because, and also not just materialistic, but also focused on getting results, creating things, maybe having really out-of-the-box ideas, so very intellectually stimulated and motivated. There could, however, ironically, be a little bit of a detachment towards, let's say, maybe even a detachment towards things that are modern and technology, right? So you could become a real hermit with this placement. But again, I wouldn't look too much into it. Rahu, like I said, Rahu in Aquarius is still pretty strong. The signifiers, all the significations and the symbolisms of Aquarius are going to be strong here. But there might still be, like, let's say you're the kind of person who becomes isolated from the rest of the world and you want to be pursuing your own values and your own system. So very independent, very much a rebel without a cause, just opposing the social structures of your environment just for the sake of them. That could be Rahu in Aquarius. Ketu in Aquarius could show a loss of spiritual energy, ironically. So if anything, I would say that Ketu in Aquarius is more likely to become materialistic, because Ketu in Aquarius would show that there's detachment towards Aquarian energy. So you might see someone who is not so humanitarian, not so humanitarianly inclined, not so focused on equality of opportunities, of caring about others. Instead, you might see a person who's more driven towards self-expression, because Rahu would be in Leo in this situation. So you would see a person who is much more individualistic and selfish in a way, selfish, quote unquote. Not that it's a bad thing, because, you know, it takes all sorts. But, you know, Ketu in Aquarius would be, like I said, just a lot less humanitarian, a lot less open-minded about a lot of things, about relating to people from different cultures, for instance, etc. Might be less open-minded towards New Age spirituality, even astrology or tarot, things like that, or anything alternative. But again, this is kind of like, again, a very basic interpretation. A lot has to be analyzed when it comes to the overall horoscope. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say about Aquarius placements in the D9. Just bear in mind, as I said, actually you can apply this to some extent in every divisional chart, but I would not advise you to try to interpret it. Except in the D1, you can definitely see similar interpretations in the D1, but like I said, in the D9, they're even more prominent, they're even more deeply felt on a personal level by the native, because it has to do with the inner world, and to some extent also, of course, their reality, especially after the age of 35. But I would look at it not, like I said, not from a fatalistic perspective, but rather from the perspective of how your inner landscape and your mentalities and your experiences influence your decisions in life. So this is pretty much what I wanted to say, and I hope that you have enjoyed this, and please comment in the comment section if you have, and yeah, please like the video, and of course feel free to ask any questions in the comment section connected to this video. I'm very curious to hear your feedback.